Hey everybody, this is Rydo, and we are doing the Steam fall list cleanup in the honor of spring cleaning, which is around the time that this is being recorded. Today we should wrap up. We're starting with games starting with the letter W, and frankly that should be the rest of the fall list. It's been a long journey, and as a recap, in case you haven't heard it before, I have this really long fall list, which is the list of games that maybe are going to be good enough to go to the wish list, where the wish list is the list of games I actually want to buy and cover on my YouTube channel. I play Hearthstone and talk about video game news, and more importantly to this conversation, look at every single game that comes out on Steam every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, so the fall list grows almost on a daily basis, so it needs to be cleaned up. Also, we are looking at games that came out either before January 1st, 2019, which means they've been given at least 6 months to gain a following, or on some rare occasions we'll be looking at games that came out after the first but already have the arbitrary number of 20 verified purchase reviews. This game, which we'll use as an example, has only 4 verified purchase reviews, and it came out July 4th, 2017, so it's been 2 years. Looking at this game in general, there really doesn't seem like anything here that would interest me. This almost guaranteed seems to be a game where my standards would have been a lot lower. Even 6 months ago, there really doesn't. There's been a major difference since that point, and now I'm a lot more critical. This game kind of looks like nothing. It kind of looks like it might be a Unity or Unreal Asset flip, although there's a little bit of polish in this one room. Everything else in the game seems to be pretty empty. I know there's a game that kind of looks like this. The only thing I could think is it's tagged USC Games. If that is the University of Southern California, this might be a student project. If that's the case, that might explain why I would want to cover it. That being said, for $18.99 and being published by the University of Southern California and not being free, doesn't make it feel like it's really a student project as much as it's a student project that was then potentially stolen by the college, which some colleges will do that. They will copyright and take your thesis projects or any work you do while in college. You're paying the college thousands of dollars for an education, and then they'll take whatever you make and sell it. They also do that to professors quite a bit too. So that may be the case here, that might not. It kind of doesn't matter. The price is too high for what they're showing. Other red flags we'll be looking at games is generally we want to see 20 reviews, and in the positive category. This doesn't have 20 reviews, so it's not relevant. We'll be looking for price. We'll be looking to make sure games have a single player experience, because frankly I just don't criticize multiplayer focused or multiplayer centric games. It's too random. One person's experience can be completely different from another person's experience when playing multiplayer, and I just don't have the skill set or the experience to try and criticize something like this. This is interesting, the reviews that they're using here. They've got CNN, NPR, and Common Sense Media. None of these are mainstream video game journalist sites. Now that's, I guess, maybe a good thing to a lot of people as much as it might be a bad thing. It just seems really odd, like, in general. Maybe, I guess, CNN has some website somewhere where they actually review video games. They certainly don't talk about them in a positive light on TV. Other red flags we're looking for is, on rare occasions, I have noticed a higher chance of a game being a low-effort garbage game if it supports English and Russian only, or English and Chinese only. That's just how it is. Other things we'll be looking for as red flags is, on a rare occasion we might see what a game is getting referred to or recommended to. Like, The fact that they're saying Dear Esther is similar to this game, and I know that Dear Esther is a walking simulator, makes me think this is a walking simulator. And if we're still trying to think about it, we would come down and look at the negative reviews, because I find most positive reviews to be pretty useless. And yeah, those are the general red flags. Now there might be cases where I just make a special exception and put a game on the wish list, but for the most part it's procedural. We've got the rules, we know what things we're looking for. In the description here, there's nothing here saying anything about it being a student project. So USC Games might be something completely different, or it might not stand for a college or anything like that. I could go to the homepage, I suppose, if I wanted to research it more, but it doesn't matter. Very possibly, I thought USC Games was a student project. That would be about the only explanation as to why this would be on the follow list anyways. But yeah, it's not relevant. It's never going to be relevant. Give it 10 more years, it will probably only get 2 more reviews. And a lot of that has to do with just how many games come out and how quickly games are forgotten, and how the recommendation engine on Steam really is not designed to push you to play an old game that wasn't popular. There's plenty of games. There's, in my estimation, as many as 3,000 games worth owning on Steam and playing. So it wouldn't be surprising if there's closer to 10 to 30,000 other games on Steam that are not worth ever knowing anything about. Moving on to the next game, we'll want to move fast here. We're considering Warbot. Again, not relevant. This came out March 26, 2018. This is a VR fighting game where you're looking from the outside, I assume. Or at least it looks like that in all the images. So it's the equivalent of you're controlling the robot, and then you in VR see him from a third-person perspective. Well, this game clearly isn't relevant. It's still in early access. Anything that's been in early access more than 6 months, I've pretty much written off. It's particularly a VR game also, which means it's probably never coming out of early access for that reason, because there's such a small audience. $18.99 for a VR game is not as expensive as it sounds. Most VR games are overpriced. And even if this was a good game that I was going to put on the wish list, I couldn't, because I'm almost certainly never actually going to buy a VR headset. And so I'm just leaving a small collection of things, of VR games on the follow list, just in case I someday find the money or VR gets really cheap and it starts making sense. It's not even so much a price. You can get a VR headset for probably used for a couple $100, $300 maybe, if you already have a PC that can run it. But there's not really a significant amount of software games to play on them. So there's no software to sell the hardware, and the hardware is not good enough to sell itself so that people would want to make software. Also, this game has that red flag of being English and Chinese only. That being said, this does actually look a little bit better than most VR games, just because you're not standing in one place. But why would you have a fighting game in VR, particularly a third-person perspective fighting game in VR? That seems like you've just got bad game production in the sense, because you've thought of a concept and not game tested that concept, or thought about that concept well enough to realize that there really isn't going to be a market for this. the idea, like all fighting games in my mind, are at least trying to be at the Evo fighting tournaments. The idea of Evo having on its main stages a VR fighting game where people are swinging their arms left and right, physically replicating the actions they want their characters to do, takes it extremely far away from a fighting game of any other sort where you're pressing buttons really fast on a fight stick. So it just doesn't seem realistic that people would really want to play this kind of game. And quite frankly, if we got past the point of VR and it was just a brain to computer direct interface and you just dreamed and hallucinated the entirety of the game, that would be more realistic, believable as far as a fighting game that you would want to play in that new technology, instead of having to learn a whole new control style and have a heavy VR headset on your face and fight from a third-person perspective that you probably wouldn't want. The angles on this are actually pretty bad too, because every fighting game I've ever seen, it is at a very flat 0-degree angle. There's no tilting the camera one way or the other. Like every fighting game I've ever seen looks like this, with the characters flat on a horizontal plane. Tilt I've never seen. Maybe in a cutscene or in a finisher move. So anyways, this game can be removed. Let's move on. Other things I forgot to mention is that while this is probably the last recording, there still may be some instances of too much of my RAM being used up, so images will be either slow or not loading at all. Also, if we happen to run into any more adult games, which we might, I'll go blurry just to make sure the screenshots are YouTube friendly. So this next game is called Warfallen. It came out November 4th, 2018. It has 9 user reviews. This doesn't actually look terrible. It's still in early access, unfortunately, and it doesn't have any VR element to it, although it kind of looked like it might be a VR game. But it also doesn't have any single player experience in it. So here's the problem with this game. Even though it looks somewhat decent, and in all honesty, even this level of polish could be done with a mediocre amount of asset flipping. The problem nowadays is you can asset flip a really, really good looking game. The problem here is 9 verified user reviews, verified purchase user reviews, to pay $20 for an online multiplayer game. There will be no player base here. You will never get to play the game at all. And if I was to come over here, let's see. Like, here's a different reason why you can't play it. Took 10 minutes to boot the game, got infinite loading time just in the tutorial. Why did I buy this? So it doesn't have any relevancy, and a multiplayer game like this would have to either be a major success. For every one major success, there's probably 50 failures that just don't have enough of an advertising budget, or even give free keys to enough streamers or video game sites to get some coverage on it. It's kind of impossible to recommend this game when you have Mordhau, which is the game that is kind of popular right now with 18,101 reviews. So Mordhau is somewhat the one to play right now, but then also Chivalry 2 has been announced, so maybe by the time this episode airs, there's another option. But Warfallen, yep, just runs into that not being relevant issue. So that's going to get removed. Next game we have to consider is Warhammer Age of Sigmar Champions. This looks like a card game, but it's 61% positive of 146 reviews. Came out February 19th, 2019. I'm always looking for a new card game, particularly a collectible card game, because I would like to replace Hearthstone. It's a game that's a little too slow and frankly is just old at this point. But it's hard to find. I've yet to find anything that really feels like it could replace it. Magic Arena is a good choice that might replace it, but playing a Magic game takes even longer than playing a Hearthstone game. So this is single player with online multiplayer, which is kind of what you would need to replace Hearthstone. There are some single player only card games that are more like deck building games, like Slay the Spire, and I just mentioned Magic Arena, which is different than Magic Duels, and that's kind of the problem with Magic in general. Is Magic the Gathering is they've put a bunch of varied versions of their games, because the game can't even log in as a mistake. Most of the games against the computer end in losses. A surprising amount of them come from behind victories by the computer, where it would have lost the next turn with my minions rotate. So apparently the game cheats. There's a review that has literally nothing in it. That's useless. It's also worth mentioning that this is a game that was activated via Steam key, which is questionable. How can you activate a free-to-play game via Steam key? Why would you need to? So it feels like maybe this game was not free-to-play at the beginning. Well, regardless of the issues, I really can just fall down to mob rule and see that this is not good enough. It does have the Warhammer name on it, but frankly the Warhammer name is 50-50 at best for a sign of quality, and I really haven't played any of the Warhammer games to get into it. Next game we have here is called Washed Up. This came out October 16th, 2016. This looks like an interesting kind of hidden gem game, where it's Tetris, but the pieces come from the sides, and you're playing as little crabs that are putting the pieces together. And it seems like it is trying to do something slightly more unique and different than what you would see normally on a Tetris clone. It's $11.99, which is asking a little too much, frankly. And it does fall into the pattern of being irrelevant, since it has only 6 reviews. It has 34 achievements, which isn't too many. If it had like 100 achievements, I'd think it's an achievement game. Or sometimes you'll see really cheap games that have only 1 achievement that are achievement games. 8 reviews, 100% positive. Let's see. So, I guess in this case, I have to make a special exception, because I kind of do want to cover this game, and I don't really have any other game that would be quite like it. There is Puyo Puyo and Puyo Puyo Tetris available on Steam, which are, so you can play Puyo Puyo Champions or Puyo Puyo Tetris, which is about the closest real Tetris games. In fact, there might actually be quite a few Tetris games on Steam. Nope, just that one. But this is taking it to a different level. So, even though this isn't a relevant game, I'm going to make a special exception and put it on the wish list, because I really do want to try this out. Now, when I have to actually put my money where my mouth is, I really would only want to play $30 for this game. I do have to approach it from the idea that this may have 5 puzzles in it, or no puzzles and it's just procedurally generated. I may only want to play it for like 30 minutes, and so when comparing it to the 1,000 plus other games on the wish list, I would have to price it accordingly to that. But I do every now and then try to find some hidden gems. I am probably not likely to find any of them, though. Next game we have to consider is called Watching Delusion, which has 4 user reviews and came out August 3rd, 2018. This looks like a puzzle game of a unique style. I would call this a single screen Unity puzzle, in the sense that all of the screen is just one screen. It doesn't scroll to the left or pan to the left or up or down or anything like this. Single screen Unity games sometimes is a problem, sometimes isn't. So the idea is you've got pieces, they have to overlap, but only overlap once. Unless there are 2 eyes on it, then it needs to overlap twice. Interesting. It's kind of a creepy game. They really didn't need the eyeballs for it to be a game that plays like that. So that might very well explain why this is tagged as a horror game and why this puzzle game didn't sell that well, is because it's embracing a creepiness that I'm not sure every fan of puzzle games would want to play. This is 99 cents and it's bundled with all the other games from this developer. 23 games for $58. It's English only, 7 achievements. Let's look at the 2 negative reviews, I suppose. Let's see, the background music and sound effects are absolutely wonderful. The graphics are very good, however the puzzle itself is very bad. Everything the game introduces, every time the game introduces a new mechanic, it isn't actually a new mechanic, it's just the illusion to trick the player's eyes. It's clear, I cleared all levels to make sure there's nothing I've missed before making this review. For example, there are a pair of trump blanks which demonstrate the number of eyes of each blank instead of its own. It's nothing new, it just makes the screen more complicated. There's a question mark blank which does not notice you about the numbers of eyes. However, you can easily know by dragging multiple blocks above it and see where the blank opens its eyes. So it's yet another visual confusion rather than a proper puzzle. Later stages demonstrate that all visual confusions in one screen, so you'll never get the proper layout in your mind. I took a screenshot and just wrote down the number of blanks to solve them. This is an awful experience. If the game demonstrated just one plain puzzle without the visual illusions, like Chapter 1, I would have had much more fun to play. Let's see what this other review says. A bunch of the additional mechanics are just obfuscation of information, so it's the exact same complaint as the other review. So, yeah, this is probably a great example of somebody making a game, not being great about making puzzle games in general, and adopting an art style that is totally not the target market, and thus their game didn't sell, whereas plenty of other single screen Unity games, puzzle games, have sold. So yeah, this can leave the follow list. Next game we have to consider is Webb VR, the James Webb Space Telescope virtual experience. This is 93% positive of 15 reviews, but it came out October 31st, 2018, so it's still not really to that arbitrary 20 review number that I like to see. 20 reviews is about the point where I think you couldn't purchase positive reviews and manipulate it. I think you could probably, if you have a game on Steam, get 10 people to buy your game and review it. 20 seems like a lot. Although, quite frankly, if you are a AAA publisher or developer, it would be certainly nothing hard at all to pay hundreds of people to buy and review your game. But maybe Steam would catch that if all the IP addresses came from like the same country at the same time. This doesn't look particularly well animated. This kind of does feel like it's more of an educational VR experience. That being said, it's free, so the price is right. There's no in-app purchases that would be listed here. Oddly, it says captions available. I don't think you see that very often in games. This is probably more of an interactive experience, but it is something I'll leave on the fall list, even though it's not really that relevant. There are a couple of better space VR games, but if you were into space and had a VR headset, or if you had a kid who was into space and had a VR headset, they would definitely appreciate one more. So that can stay on the fall list. Next game we have to consider is Weedcraft. Now, inherently, this Devolver Digital published game is moderately positive at 72% for 342 user reviews. But the thing here, particularly as a YouTuber, is I don't know if I can YouTube family friendly cover this type of thing. Like, from what I've heard when this first came out, they were having trouble putting ads for this game on Twitter and Facebook because of the fact that it is selling marijuana and effectively growing marijuana in what looks like a basement more than an actual properly licensed and registered plantation or farm, where in the states where growing weed has been allowed. Although many of those states also allow for you to grow a small amount when you've got multiple strains, which is what I assume these different colors are all about, and a lot going on here. And certainly these people don't seem like they're dressing for an above ground successful business venture. This feels very much like a underground illegal business. Here they've got Bernie Sanders and on the video and all this. If anything, I think the legalization of marijuana movement has long since told people to stop doing things like this, because this hurts the image. We, as a actual industry, wants to look professional, wants to pay its taxes, does not want to look like it is just this criminal organization being run by criminals that are poorly dressed, and that whole perception that was being put forward has changed quite a bit. Is there anything else to say about this? I just don't think I can play it, and it's popular enough. If we looked at the negative reviews, we'd probably see the game is not that great. 67 on Metacritic. It's almost certainly not something that would be anything more than a farming simulator with a very specific crop, whereas if you were to just make a standard farming simulator and marijuana was one of the options, that would probably be a better way to go. And there's several joke weed games and mobile games that already exist. I would put this closer to something like Adventure Capitalist than a real simulator game. For instance, here's Honey Cam Studio, where you're running cam girls for money, or Life as a Capitalist as another simulator. Let's see. Yeah. Let's see what this is. This is too long though. People are not happy that it doesn't have a sandbox mode according to this review. So there's a bunch of scenarios that you have to play as kind of a real-time strategy game. Yeah, on the face of it, it looks like it's just not that good of a game. Now, I could certainly go into a bigger rant and talk about how marijuana was at one time considered pretty legal, and it was only made illegal by Ronald Reagan as a way of arresting people who would have voted against him. The youth and the African American community in particular were voting Democrat way more than Republicans, so Ronald Reagan basically started the war on drugs intentionally just to delegitimize people and disenfranchise people from the right to vote, and then it continued down a long path of criminalizing people for having marijuana in an unfair and unjust way, which created a major crisis of mass incarceration that was only made worse during the Clinton era. So it's not just Republicans, it was pretty much a bad effort on both sides of the aisle, and only until very recently has the conversation to even begin to fix this basic conspiracy that's been going on for at least 3 decades. Only now has the conversation slightly been starting to be broached, and it won't be fixed completely until like every person who was arrested for having marijuana on them, or it has their records expunged, and whatever restitution you can squeeze out of the government, which is probably nothing. But there's been entire lives certainly ruined due to the war on drugs, where you might get arrested for a small amount of drugs, get a felony count on your record, and then never be able to get another job of any quality or any job at all. And then when you're released from prison, you're required to get a job. You can't get a job, you go back to prison, or you get close to not being able to get a job, you get desperate, and then you have to do some other crime, and it just creates recidivism and makes people worse and worse because their options are being taken away from them for ridiculous reasons. And quite frankly, the government is, I'm getting into a rant here, really stupid to have ever illegalized marijuana. I can understand some of the harder drugs being illegal or highly controlled, but marijuana could have done society, and any society, very well, because it is a great way to have people and a society kind of chill out and not be so upset. And when citizens are upset, they usually turn against their politicians. So if marijuana had just always been around, I think anger in the world would have certainly been reduced by quite a bit. Of course, it's harder to prove that. Moving on, next game we have to consider here is Welcome Above, which is a VR game that allows the player to feel the experience of flying. This came out December 14th, 2018. It has 9 user reviews. It's still in early access. Unfortunately, there's quite a few flying games that have been promised, and none of them seem to ever be good, and I would say more than half of them seem to never be finished. When I look at this has the feeling of an asset flip game where there's just random visual assets floating around. I think they're trying to make it look like you're in some kind of virtual reality, and that's why things look this way, but I think a significant amount of the way things look this way is because they just don't have the visual assets, and they don't have the engine to display the visual assets in a fast pace. So the flickering of objects coming in, instead of that being something people would complain about in the game, they're trying to make that a selling point. Where texture, loading, and flicker in any other game would be a major complaint. Regardless, though, it's in early access. It's probably never coming out of early access. Last update on this was in December 12th, 2018. 42 achievements seems a little high. We could look at the reviews, but we kind of don't need to. Yeah. This can get removed. Moving on, next game we have to consider is Wall True Learn. So this is a programming game. Although I guess this might be some Python. I'm not sure what this would really be, because it seems unfamiliar the way this is phrased with the certain things. So I have some education in programming, so I like programming games, and I'm willing to try them as long as they look like they're somewhat decent. I would say the graphics on this look a little rough, but not terrible. This is 89% positive of 1,383 user reviews, if I can read it right. It seems like there might be some examples in which you have to program icons or cars or things so that there's a connection to the real world versus just the programming things. And this is a drag and drop programming language, which there is some of this you do when you're using a top level editor like Unreal or Unity, but the core part of the programming, the part of programming you really need to understand, is the typing of text. Unreal and Unity in parts can be used by people who have no proper training in programming, animators and just simple bug fixers. So they've made a top level overlay to make things seem simplistic, more simplistic than they actually are. This is weird. Though the main game is $12.99, and then there's these other packs that include the soundtrack, the art pack, or seems to be some kind of pictures in this pack. What is this? Yeah. Let's see. It's a huge infographic about technologies and their applications. So this is another, like a poster is what you're getting if you're buying that. And I've seen that on Steam before. It's kind of bad salesmanship, frankly, to label things confusingly so you feel like you have to buy all the DLC when the actual gameplay is just the basic version. Multiple language support is slightly nice. I've often wondered what it looks like to program in other languages. I think for the most part you probably still end up typing things in English for them, really. I don't think it changes too much when you're programming. There are definitely some other programming games to consider, like Shenzhen.io, which is I think pretty popular too. And there's been definitely some bad ones. I've covered Human Resource Machine. I think that's a pretty good programming game too. It's pretty basic, but maybe Magnum Opus is even a little bit more basic. It's the concepts of programming, but done through alchemy, or Infinifactory might be another programming game. 7 Billion Humans, the sequel to Human Resource Machine. I want to get around to playing that at some point. Let's see. Here we have some negative reviews. I struggle to even call this a puzzle game when so many of the levels are putting a single piece in the middle of the board and connecting the ins and outs of the board. There is a wide range, certainly, of programming education too. So something like this almost certainly is a kid's game for 10, 11-year-olds, not something you would expect an 18-year-old to be playing to try to learn programming. I would expect an 18-year-old to actually be learning programming from a class and actually creating things from scratch. But I really have to go with mob rule here. 89% positive tells me that this is good enough. So this can go to the wish list, and probably when I put it on the follow list it had no reviews, and otherwise I would just put it on the wish list then. In fact, even if I was just to reload the page, something like this very possibly would have 1 or 2 more reviews. I think it had like 1 more. Alright, moving on. Next game we have on Steam to consider is a visual novel. Looks like it's a Western visual novel. It's 63% positive of 11 user reviews, so it's not relevant. What caught my eye on this is this character apparently has like this flame tattoo on his neck, which seems odd because the characters don't look old enough to have a full flame tattoo, unless this was just some weird birthmark. And it seems odd that that would be a Japanese developer that would ever do that, because the Japanese, at least last time I checked, had a major distaste and dislike for people having tattoos, because they think if you have a tattoo you're in the Yakuza, because pretty much everybody in Japan with a tattoo is in the Yakuza. And then this character also has like several piercings, so it was a weird looking art style, and this seems to be kind of a romance visual novel. It's $2.99, but it's not tagged with any nudity or sexual content per se, and it has the red flag of being an English-Russian game. And yeah, I don't think there's a level of quality here that would be necessary, or even really an interesting story. Like, the description here kind of makes no sense. Neoth, a young prince tired of his troublesome royal duties, meets a curious, cheerful girl. The event turns everything on the head. This is a prince? Like, what is he a prince of? Is he a prince of demons? Is that the idea? Who knows? Like, the story seems to have just been made up out of nothing to match art that already existed. So this is almost certainly a low effort Russian game, although it's really hard to tell in the visual novel sense. I have certainly seen a lot worse art style, and it's pretty much impossible to tell how long a story is. You could go down to the reviews and see how many hours people spent on it. Like 1 hour, less than an hour. Poor writing, arts from a teenager, just wanted to make a game but failed. Yeah, I could certainly imagine a bunch of teenagers from around the world trying to break it in as an artist, and if this is a teenager artist, I would say they definitely are on the path to being a pretty good animator, but just being a good animator doesn't mean you're a good game developer or a writer, and you can make a visual novel. There's quite a lot of competition amongst visual novels, and that's why you'll see a good visual novel selling for like $35 instead of $30. So yeah, this can get removed. Next game we have to consider is called Whispers of a Machine. This is 95% positive of 100 user reviews. Came out April 7th, 2019. So it's a point-and-click adventure game. I'm a sucker for point-and-click adventure games. My guess here is when I put it on the fall list, it didn't have any reviews. Otherwise, I would just put this on the wish list. Now, what keeps happening to me is I'm becoming ever more a sucker for point-and-click adventure games, and I have bought quite a few of them and then not really enjoyed playing them. after a certain point. So I, at some point, might wise up and stop playing them. That being said, by just the standards that we're holding everything else to, this definitely looks like a game worth playing. $14.99, full audio in English, which is something you kind of want to have. 78 on Metacritic. Positive reviews are going to outweigh negative reviews since it's 95% positive. By the way, I have plugins on Chrome that show me like the Metacritic on a Steam page. That's not there by default. So this can go to the wish list, and we can move forward. Next game we have to consider is called Who Must Die. This is probably a somewhat low effort horror asset flip game, but it looks slightly polished, or at least when it came out November 13th, 2018, it looked polished enough to catch my attention. The idea here is, I guess you're looking at full motion video at these three patients, and one of them is supposed to be contaminated, and thus you have to kill them or run experiments on them. So it seems like what they did is they had a camera and did some full motion video and then put some video game elements around it. So as a concept, slightly interesting, but it clearly wasn't implemented that well. $6.99, full English audio, French subtitles. We could look at the reviews. I have no idea what the devs wanted to accomplish with the game. Playing through the video game takes about 20 minutes. It consists of 5 rooms and 12 lines of dialogue. The whole story is there was an outbreak. Here are 3 people. One of them is infected. You have to choose who it is. You read through a file for each patient, stimulate them with music/gas to see how they react, and then choose who to euthanize. That's it. That's the whole game. 20 minutes of boring gameplay accompanied by a monotonous elevator music. I can't recommend this to anyone. Ends in 10 minutes. Inherently, if you're going to make a full motion video game, the thing you would have to embrace is that you're going to make a lot of footage and a lot of very similar footage, so there are different outcomes. It would be really, really easy to have a randomized yes, you're right, or no, you're wrong outcome for each of the characters, and then that would double the endings. But clearly they didn't do that. This is also being published by Plugin Digital, which is a publisher that's not particularly known for publishing a lot of great things. They seem at best to be about 30% of the time good, and then they publish a lot of other games that you've just never heard of, and this is just another example of that. So yeah, this can get removed easily. There is several other full motion videos that you can find on Steam that would be better than this. Alright, next game we have to consider is called Yeti, I guess, or Weiss. A 2D platforming action game, combat, dodge, and finder. So it's got a kind of unique thumbnail here and kind of a pixelated retro art style, it looks like, overall. I don't know how good this game is, but it's 83% positive, so the audience who bought it seemed to like it fine. I would say it does look a little bit darker than it needs to be, and having a border around the edge is kind of distracting. It would have been better if they got rid of the border and just showed the life bar and the secondary attack that was here. The camera is zoomed out, I think probably too far. There's really not a reason for it to be that zoomed out. And it seems like it might be a pretty simplistic game. It might not be that long. But for the $2.99, which it's selling for now, it's $4.99 when not discounted. People seem to be okay with it. So let's get an idea of the length of gameplay, and because we're kind of comparing it to something like Momodora or Toho Luna Nights, some of these other Japanese platforming games, the Shanti series, for instance. Let's see, the most helpful review here. This is a disappointing review to write. I enjoyed the game very much during the first couple of levels, but then the oddities and bugs started just stacking up and tipped the scales. Blah blah blah. Let's skip some of this. Scroll down to the bottom. Some of these reviews are way too long. Overall, the game has definite potential with some rebalancing, fixing bugs, and the introduction of more items and content. The game could be great. I sincerely hope the developer will put the necessary effort into these changes. I'd gladly give the game another go at that point. This review was written September 7th, 2016. Let's see, has this been updated? Well, they put an advertisement for their next game out March 25th. This came out May 5th, 2017. Recent post though. It was alright again. I guess the biggest problem is the dash attack. For its price, $3 on sale, it's fine, but definitely not a must-have. Amazing short story. 60 out of 10. Let's see. So, I'm getting the feeling here, is Momodora 3, what this game really is going to fall into in Forgotten End. Might also be a platformer to compare it to. I think this really just doesn't have enough quality for me to want to play it. It's just barely on the line, and I don't know if I really need to play a ton of 2D platformers. On the other hand, it's cheap, so a mediocre platformer might make some sense. But if I was going to play a mediocre platform, what it would come down to is, has this developer distributor put anything else on their on Steam that has any interest? Documentary, which they are advertising, I think might be on the fall list or wish list, but it looks like a mobile game, and it's really in no way close to what the Wincy is. So there's no real comparison in. And then Moonlight Thief here is tagged as an adventure RPG game, and it too looks very, very different to what has come out. And this came out April 26, 2019. It has 4 user reviews. So yeah, what do you really say about this game either? It's just kind of like not relevant. So you kind of have 2 games that don't have any coverage, and 1 game that got a small following and people seem to like it, but seems to be right on the line. Well, I suppose we have removed so many games from the fall list, it doesn't really hurt to put an extra game on the wish list. The truth is, I may never get around to buying this, or I might get this really cheap, and if I got this for 99 cents and only spent 30 minutes showing it off, that seems perfectly fine to me. It also might make a good 2D platformer to compare to better 2D platformers. So if I was to play Momodora 1 and then play this game, then play Momodora 2, and then play a different game, then play Momodora 3, that would be a better series than having Momodora 1, 2, and 3 air in a straight row on my channel. So yeah, I'll be generous. It's being particularly generous, but I'll put it on the wish list. Next game we have to consider is called Windlands 2. This is a VR game for $29.99. I kind of like this low polygon art style, but it so blends into the background. I could easily see people not even knowing that there's a human here or that there's a human here for everything else that is here, and that there's a guy here also. And would like to see what this game is. It's a first-person grappling hook exploration game, which I don't know how much of this is exploration and how much of this is just kind of racing. I guess it is definitely a different experience from what you're normally doing in VR, which is just standing in one place and shooting at things. But each of these scenes I'm seeing feel like they are probably more of a demo of a game than a fully polished game that has lots of different gameplay mechanics. Well, it's positive, so we can just say mob rule on this and leave it on the follow list. The only thing would be interesting is if you could play this without VR, but I don't think you can. Yep. And I guess the question would be, is there a Windlands 1? And what does that look like? Windlands 1 is mostly positive. 2 as a game you can't play on the wishlist, or you can't play on. Well, it says VR, but then it doesn't have the warning sign of VR. So can you play Windlands 1? So Windlands 1, you can play without VR. So I'm just gonna add that to the wish list and think about playing that. And then, come on, what's the back page? There it is. Windlands 2 requires VR, so they went full requirement in the second game. So multiple advanced modes, no hooks, one life, hook everything, anything. Speed runs, bow weapons. So you're kind of in a weird position here. Even if I did cover and play Windlands 1, the second game then forces you into a VR mode. It's kind of the prime example of what gamers would hate if VR was to become really popular. If major games, say Borderlands 3, for example, required VR, whereas Borderlands 1, 2, and Borderlands the pre-sequel all did not require VR, that would definitely limit the audience and irritate the existing fan base. I guess Paytech games can get away with this a little bit, since very few people, I imagine, heard of Windlands 1. But yeah, that would certainly be annoying. This one will just stay on the follow list. It looks good enough. So next game we have to consider is Winds of Change. It looks like it is a visual novel for personified animals / maybe a furry game visual novel, which I have no problem with that. In fact, you could probably do a pretty interesting story there, depending on how serious you take it. The problem with this game, though, is that it came out March 21st, 2018, and it's still in early access. So either I would be amazingly generous and leave it on the follow list, or I remove it because it's just been in early access way too long. And visual novels shouldn't be in early access anyways, and they're promoting this other game, Major Minor, which they made before, so this developer is kind of going for a very niche audience. So let's look at what their previous game did. It's very positive. Came out October 26th and it's not in early access still. Alright. Well. Alright. Yeah, this can get removed. It's just it's a bad way to treat your customers to not have a finished product when it is a visual novel. They're calling this a adventure game. There's no adventure game here. This is a visual novel. There's no gameplay that would to be shown that would convince me that this is actually an adventure game. And I probably would have some problem with the art style if I was going to be really specific. These characters don't seem to be amazingly varied. They all seem to be pretty muscular, relatively the same height, relatively the same animals, relatively the same build. They all seem to be male. There's probably some more variety you could do with that. Just if you are trying to have potential romantic interest characters, which is what I assume is going on here, but yeah, it says romance options. So yeah, this can get removed. Next game we have to consider is called Windscape. This is rated 80% positive of 110 user reviews. Came out March 27th, 2019. Let's see. You play as a young girl living on your parents' farm, set in the lovely world made of floating islands in the sky. As you discover the world, you learn that something has gone terribly wrong inside. Islands are breaking apart and falling from the sky. So this seems like this is a Minecraft survival style game that moves into an actual game, like an actual story mode. Looks like you actually do fight something, although I guess Minecraft you fight things too. So yeah, I don't know how much of this you spend in dungeons fighting things and how much of this you would spend farming. One would hope you don't spend too much time grinding or fighting. Pretty much in any RPG, I'm definitely over the idea of grinding for resources or grinding for XP. This is $19.99. It's from Head Up, which I'm fairly certain Head Up has done something that I recognize. Yeah, Head Up has done The Texorcist, which is another game I looked at, and Bridge Constructor Portal. So they're probably 50-50 as far as quality releases too. They're not amazingly a great brand as far as a publisher to trust. Let's look at the negative reviews. I'm kind of looking for things to complain about. I guess Steam's recommendation engine here doesn't really have anything too similar. Let's look at the negative reviews. Here we have a March 27th review. Do not play this game. It's not even beta ready. The game just flat out sucks. The AI is all boring and rarely see an enemy, and all you do is sidestep and hit in a circle. There's no story. If you want a subpar walking sim, then this is up your alley. And that apparently is from Rainmaker. So somebody's just copying somebody else's reviews. Game overall is extremely meh. It's an okay time sink. It's fun, visually appealing, Zelda-inspired game for the first couple hours. Then you run out of equipment to progress to, and then you get to the desert. We're seeing some complaints of technical issues too. Yeah, I kind of think I trust these negative reviews, even though, in all fairness, I should just say mob rule and just say, yeah, this looks good enough. What I'm seeing here in the screenshots is not selling me a lot, because what I'm not seeing here is a massive amount of characters. You have one enemy on screen and 2 trees and some background, a generic blue screen. You have here, which is your house farm area, which is they've put some work into, but I'm not seeing any animals, no chickens, no dogs, no cats, no birds. When you look here, there's looks like a pin here, and there's nothing on here. There's no guards here. There's no real blades of grass or anything being shown. Here you're in a dungeon, you see really nothing. Here you're in a forest, again, no animals, just a assortment of trees. Yeah. Every screenshot either has one boss creature or it has nothing. There's no generic grind fodder. There's no rats to kill. I see one character in total on the screenshots you actually talk to. I'm seeing a bow and an axe and some kind of magic wand and a shield as far as weapons. Not a lot of variety there either. I don't kind of know what to do here. Do I give this 6 more months and be maybe a little bit more generous on it? I guess I could. Yeah, let's give it 6 more months, because really as of this recording, March 27th, 2019 isn't that long. And they've got enough reviews that people would buy this game and review it. So maybe there is something here that that would get reviewed differently. I fear what may have happened here is review manipulation, and that's how they got 100 positive reviews, is that they just paid people to review it. So I don't want to immediately dismiss this. Maybe I'm being too generous here, so I'm just going to leave this on the follow list and give it 6 more months, and then 6 months from now hopefully I'll be willing to make a decision. Now, that being said, this might be a case that since I'm at the end of all the games and I've spent hours and hours and hours looking through so many games on the follow list, that I'm just mentally exhausted and not prepared to make the cruel decisions that I should be able to make. That certainly could be the case. Anyways, next game we have here is called Winkeljahr, the Little Shop, which sounds like it's a German game where it's a shop simulator. Now, there's a couple of Japanese shop simulator games, and there's a few games where you run a shop during the day, but then you go into dungeons and find the items you need to sell, find the weapons you sell during the night. Here, this feels almost like this is a room decorator sim game. More than anything, it seems like you really are making placements of how you would like your little shop to look. But what doesn't really feel like here is that there's actually much of a game. It's just you decorate your room the way you want it to look like within what seems to be this fenced area, which is not that big, and then you're just kind of randomly evaluated by how many customers come in and purchase something. This is early access, so I imagine they're planning on adding more design room assets, more pieces of furniture, more items on sale, and I don't think there's much else you could really do. Apparently they're trying to add tailoring, blacksmithing, and farming. This is $9.99. None of the languages have full audio. Let's see. In the description, it's shopkeeping, furnishing, and expanding, and crafting, and farming, and seasons and events. That's all it does. Whereas here's another shopkeeper game to consider that's not that good. I'm not sure if any of the shopkeeping games are actually good. There is definitely a problem with games that feel like jobs, and this is an exact example of a game that really is just doing somebody's job. Let's see. Yeah, I'm not really, as I'm trying to skim over these reviews, I'm not seeing anything inherently wrong with what this game is selling. It's telling you what you're getting. It's just the concept yourself is not something you really would want. There are definitely better games here. There is an Atelier, if I could spell Atelier game. Can't, so shopkeeper. Let's see. Yeah, there's definitely a considerable amount of shopkeeper games on Steam, and most of which are not super popular for just the concepts not being super popular. And since I can't spell Atelier, the Japanese game, there's a whole series of games under the name Atelier, but there's one specifically where you play as a shopkeeper. This can get removed from the follow list. There's just nothing special about this. Next game we have to consider is Winter's Symphonies. This came out December 28th, 2018. It's a visual novel. I kind of like the art style. It's not terrible. That being said, it has zero relevancy, so what I imagine I did is I had this on the follow list because it had full audio support, or claimed to have full audio support. That's probably it. I do want to cover some Western visual novels every now and then, but considering how 99% of all visual novels are either from Japan, China, or Korea, it's not really a legitimate and fair thing to do to cover a Western visual novel until you've covered all the amazingly great, well-selling Japanese visual novels. Yeah, there's nothing here that brings us up to quality. Meanwhile, I could be playing one of the 4 Steins Gate games, or I could be playing Clannad as just two comparisons. So Winter's Symphonies gets removed. Really shouldn't have been on the wish list in the first place, or the follow list. That's an example of my standards being low. Next game we have on Steam is called Witch Hunt. I believe this is probably more of a single player, multiplayer focused game. So I don't think this is something I'd really want to play. It's a bit of an asset flip game where you're running around the forest hunting a witch, and the witch is like this ghost-like apparition, so there's a lot of that. This is apparently from the person who made Gynophobia, a game so bad that it became covered and popular for being bad. Let's see. He wants $9.99 on this. It's rated very positively, but I feel like the reason why it's rated positively is kind of illegitimate. It's a single player experience. So, let's see. These might be troll reviews, so when it says it's actually one of the scariest games I've ever played. Or maybe it really is scary. Or maybe that's just a review that's being written by someone who's paid the review. Let's see. I'm lost and confused, says this review. At its current state, it's a 4 out of 10. This was May 16th that this review is listed. Great effort, but by one guy, but sorry it wasn't for me. I don't know what's going on in the game as a review. Yeah, I think this game in particular just kind of falls into the same category of like Slender the Arrival. Just not a game I would want to play in particular. Or heck, let's say We Happy Few, a game I like the graphics of, but I really wouldn't want to play it. I just don't think that I want to try and cover this. Like, this very well might be sort of a hidden gem, but it's not that hidden if 824 people have reviewed it. But yeah, it's not my thing. And I guess since E3 just ended as of this recording, they announced a Blair Witch game, and that Blair Witch game is almost certainly going to blow this game out of the water, and I'm not sure that there's enough of an audience or enough of a reason to have a couple of witch-centric or witch-hunting games on Steam. Yeah. What I see here is a horror equivalent of a military first-person shooter game where you're just running around a map and shooting things over and over again. And say what you want about battle royale games and other kinds of shooter games like Overwatch, where it's a hero shooter. There's something to be said about this kind of gameplay just being repetitive. Apparently that tree came to life and will attack him. Yeah, this actually does look good if you're a fan of military shooters where you're running around a small map and enemies are just spawning. I feel like I should step out of my shell, actually. I'm going to put this on the wish list. I think this is an example of I should step out of my shell, and this would be probably better a style game to try and play than trying to jump into a Call of Duty game, for instance, even though a Call of Duty game would have a lot more relevancy. So yeah, I'm going to put that on the wish list. It's not a bad thing to try something different, and it's a lot of times I've said, well, this game is just not for me, but there should be some times when I go, well, this game is not for me, but I should try it anyways. Next game we have to consider is Witch Thief. This came out September 20th, 2018. It is a 3D bullet hell shooter where you're playing as a witch. There's only 7 user reviews. It's $19.99. It's coming to the Nintendo Switch according to this update on January 20th, and that's where I think I got the coverage from. Meanwhile, there's, I'm sure, several other anime-esque top-down bullet hell shooter games to compare this to, but this is, I think, really the only 3D perspective, third-person perspective game like this, and I wanted to try that. There was definitely, what is this? This is a bullet hell shooter with sexual content, Maidens of Hollow Dream. Haven't heard of that one. So yeah, before I was distracted there, there was a game where you played as witches before that wasn't good enough. I kind of want to give this one a chance. This really is a game though that is priced really high, so if I was to get it, I'm paying a premium, and the negative reviews certainly are saying it's too hard, which any bullet hell shooter game is almost inherently going to be too hard for me in particular. And there is something to be said, I guess, against Nier Automata, which is a 3D bullet hell shooter style game in some of the fights, so you'd probably be a lot better playing Nier Automata than this I think you unlock different witches with different attack patterns and powers. Or, you know, Fury is kind of like this game too. So it's kind of even hard to say that this game has a good chance of being a hidden gem. This might just be a hidden garbage game for $20. But I think it's kind of unique enough, and maybe I'm just being too generous, and so I'm going to put this on the wish list. It is also a great example of games getting out on the Switch or the Xbox or the PlayStation, and that no longer being an indication of quality whatsoever. There have been quite a few bad games that simply get reported to the eShops, and it really doesn't mean anything. Next game we have to consider is Witch's Tales. It came out October 15th, 2018. This looks to me like it is a hidden object game of some sort, although it seems like it's a match things from two piles style game, which kind of makes it closer to a tile mahjong game. But in general speak, I would still call this a hidden object style game. It's mostly this simplistic adventure game where you are asked to do these little mini games as the gameplay mechanics. Even if it weren't for the fact that it's a not that interesting looking gameplay style, there's no reviews. It's not relevant whatsoever. So yeah. It's not even cheap. Yeah, there's really no reason this should have been on the wish list or the fall list. So that'll get removed. Next game we have to consider is Witching Tower VR, which looks very polished for a VR game. If anything, VR games these days have gotten worse about their visual fidelity and just have gotten very cheap. I think for the most part, any legitimate game designer who tried to make a game in VR has since given up and moved on, and now it's mostly just low effort designers, or the last few people who were working on VR games 4 years ago, or started working on a VR game 4 years ago. Yeah, this looks interesting. It's a little questionable how this game plays, since this intro video is just showing a cutscene. Seems like it's sword and shields with some puzzles and some looting, and yeah, you don't see that at all. This looks like a really good game. $19.99 VR. I will leave this on the follow list. There's really nothing here that I would see that would convince me not to want this on the fall list. This might be in the top 10 games that would push me to buying a VR headset. Unfortunately, there really aren't 9 other games that look like this, and there is always a question about length and longevity of a game like this. This might really only be an hour experience or so. Might be 5 hours for $20, but this still looks better than most VR games, so it'll stay on the fall list. Next game we have to consider is Wolfenstein Cyberpilot, which I guess I don't have to consider. It's not out yet. It's a VR only game. If this wasn't from Bethesda, a major publisher, I would take this off the fall list because it doesn't have a release date. It kind of doesn't matter though, because this game is a VR kind of demo. It's $20 though, so it's a VR demo. It's not the Wolfenstein Youngbloods game, which is also kind of a side game. So there is something to be said about the Wolfenstein, the Old Republic, or no, Wolfenstein the New Order, which I believe is the first game in the Wolfenstein series that reboots the series for lack of a better term. You had Wolfenstein: The New Order, which is the BJ Blazkowicz main character, episode 1. And then you have Wolfenstein: The Old Blood, which is kind of a side game that people would prefer you forgot. And then there's Wolfenstein 2. What was the subtitles for Wolfenstein 2? The New Colossus or something like that. And then Wolfenstein 2 is supposed to have a Wolfenstein 3 game that hasn't been announced yet, but that's generally the idea. And Wolfenstein 2 is BJ Blazkowicz, and Wolfenstein 3 will be BJ Blazkowicz. But in between that, they apparently had too much success and couldn't leave some money on the table, so they've decided to make a VR experimental game in Wolfenstein Cyberpilot, and then a Wolfenstein Youngbloods game, which is not even listed here on the follow list, which is supposed to be his twin daughters in the future, that you play as them. So it's weird how a trilogy is going to have a trilogy of side stories. It's kind of the new Star Wars attempt of oversaturation, and even with Episode 7 and Rogue One and all these side Star Wars movies that they tried to make, they kind of quickly found out they were oversaturating the market. It feels like they might be oversaturating the market with Wolfenstein, particularly when you consider Wolfenstein, like 3D, Wolfenstein 2, the original Wolfenstein 2, are kind of the only ones that were really popular and remembered. Like, very few people remember any of the games between Wolfenstein 2 and Wolfenstein: The New Order. So there really probably isn't a lot of demand that grows on an annual basis for Wolfenstein style games, or games where it's a alternate history in World War II, which is what they're doing now. Although Wolfenstein 3D kind of wasn't so much an alternate history. I guess it still was, yeah. Still had robot Hitler, so that definitely is an alternate history. I'll leave this on the follow list, but I wouldn't be surprised if I take it off at some point. Next game we have to consider is Wolfie the Red Hood Diaries. This is a game that's in a weird position. This developer, Grin, basically went out of business. They made this game, Wolfie the Red Hood Diaries, and it ended on a cliffhanger. Rebellion has since bought the rights to it, and it really is a matter now, can they take the art assets and tell a different story with the Little Red Riding Hood concept, or do they continue the story or finish the story and resell it? It's really up to Rebellion and what Rebellion does. So in the meantime, this is a game that, well, if somebody gifted it to me for $9.99, I'd be fine to play it, and it would be an interesting historical thing to look at, but it's not an amazingly great game, and it ends on this hugely frustrating experience of yes, the game ends on a cliffhanger, and no, you're never going to get a completion to it, not even like a comic book or any kind of leaked wrap up of the story. And even in the 4 years or so that this has come out, the graphics now have kind of fallen along the wayside, and they don't look amazingly good. And I don't know how much of a copyright claim you could make if somebody else was to make a game based around Little Red Riding Hood and tell their own stylized story there. This is a lot like American McGee's Alice series, Alice Madness Returns. He's trying to get enough funding to make a third Alice game at the moment, but who knows if that ever actually happens. It's got a very niche and possibly rabid fan base, but maybe not enough to actually sell games. Meanwhile, if we compare what Rebellion puts out, they put out Sniper Elite version 2 remastered, which everybody hated. I think a big part of why people hated it though is because it was not a major remaster over the original game, and it wasn't a free upgrade to people who owned the original game. Strange Brigade, which was popular for a brief second, maybe a few weeks, but I don't think anybody's playing it now, and it pretty much requires VR players. They are known for putting out older games too, so Rebellion's not really in a position to invest money. I guess Evil Genius 2 is coming out, but I don't even know if they own the rights to Evil Genius anymore, or and there probably isn't going to be a Judge Dredd game or an Aliens vs. Predator game. Rebellion at some point was a good developer and publisher, or they've got games that are pretty good, but not expensive enough to make money. Yeah, and Rebellion here, Evil Genius 2, is coming out. So I suppose if they succeed on this game that is supposed to come out in 2020, maybe then they would have enough funding to come back and work on this game. In the meantime, I just want to remember this game exists, so I'm going to leave it on the follow list, but it kind of just is sitting there forever. Next game we have to consider is Workers and Resources Soviet Republic. This came out March 15th, 2019. It says it's a real-time Soviet-themed city builder, which that sounds like an interesting game, although this might just be a troll. The idea of running a Soviet-style communist city and seeing how well that works is interesting, but there is a problem here. Like, this could be almost certainly this is a game made by capitalists, because they're selling it for $25.99, so there might be a unfair balancing of the metrics that way. Or this could be a parody game where the communist strategies work 100% of the time, or it could be a parody game where they work 0% of the time. And there's really no good way to run a simulation to see how it would really work. Inherently, the problem with your economic system is not your economic system. You can be a capitalist country, you can be a socialist country, you can be a communist country. The problem with your system is corruption in your government. And this is a problem with all governments and all systems. Ideally, I think a mix of multiple economic systems is the best way to go, but the better solution to anything, if you try any of them, is just have a society that will not stand for corruption at any level whatsoever. So no bribing police officers, no bribing politicians, no political action committees, no claims that corporations are people, things like that. So what do I do with this game? I guess I leave this on the fall list because it's early access. This would be an interesting game. It might spawn a few rants from me, but yeah. I don't know if there was a good game to compare this to, though. Like, every other simulation of a country is probably usually a capitalist simulation, so your city skylines might be your best bet. Is Corrupt Political Simulator. That might be one to try. Or the Tropico series, you play as a corrupt dictator. That's what the whole Tropico series is. Or this I Am Your President game might be slightly interesting. It doesn't seem like it's out yet, though. Yeah, but yeah, no decision needed to be made. This will just stay on the follow list until it's out of early access, or until it's been in early access for too long. Next game we have to consider is Wounded. This is 70% positive of 48 reviews. That's a little low. Came out February 28th, 2019. I like this thumbnail. Looks like it's a horror adventure game. Screenshots aren't really showing me something. I'm seeing a lot of yellow fog over kind of just generic rooms. I'm not seeing an enemy. There's a brief horror game project with a simple story made without any funding. These seem like excuses for why your game is bad. The goal of the game is to bring the old indie horror vibe back from where it all started. Where did it all start from? It's like, where do you think indie horror games started? Because if you were to ask me, indie horror games started in text-based adventures on DOS computers in the 70s, where you would type in something and then it would describe a hideous monster to you. This game definitely does not look like a text-only DOS-based game. So it changes quite a bit if based on your age and your experience, whether you think indie horror games started when Silent Hill 1 came out, or when Alone in the Dark came out, or a text-based horror game came out. It could be anything. Any game based on your age. I'm sure there are kids young enough to say Amnesia was the first horror game, or indie horror game to come out. I'm really not seeing anything here. Does look like there's some artistic polish. This is probably a little bit more than what you could call just a low effort asset flip, but I don't think by much. $6.99. Let's look at the negative reviews. We're looking for complaints. Let's see. We also would want to look at, like, what is the play time. That would be helpful. Alright, less than an hour. I tried to like this game. I feel very frustrated because I had to give up so early, but there's no way in heaven or hell I would continue to play this. I was very excited for this game, especially because people compared it to Outlast, but I have no clue what kind of Outlast they played because this game has zero Outlast vibes. The game makes me feel like a bag of false advertisement. It looks like an amazing corridor of insanity you have to find your way through and explore its amazing ambience and chapter, but no, don't get me wrong, the graphics are great and the atmosphere too is amazing, but let me give you an example of the gameplay. You have to consistently interact with every yet so tiny item on the current map you're on, so in order to continue. You get lost all the time. The scary vibes die as soon as you research every room 10 times, and that's left is annoying. All that's left is annoyance, and because there are so many things to interact with, you have to get it all, since you don't know which item lets you continue. Maybe it's a piece of paper, maybe it's a cardboard on the ground, maybe it's a chair. You have to sit on one of like 50 plus chairs on the same room, but only that one chair is working. Okay. Yeah, that sounds kind of like a nothing game, and that's kind of what I'm seeing. Meanwhile, if you wanted to play a horror game, how about this one? Unforgiving a Northern Hymn. Let's look at that. Or there's a lot of horror games, but not a lot of them are great. Because they're mostly just jump scares. And inherently, maybe the games that are getting recommended when you're looking at the page of a bad horror game is just recommendations for more bad horror games, because I'm sure there is a percentage of fandom that likes bad horror games. Wounded can be removed though. Yeah, there's no gameplay mechanic here, and I've said it in previous recordings, I'm not going to be scared by horror games. Almost never am I scared by horror games. So I would have very little say or do. I'm not one of these streamers with the face cam that overacts and falls out of their chair every time there's a jump scare and they're playing Five Nights at Freddy's or something like that. So yeah, horror games are not something that interests me. Actually, I think this game is already on my wish list, but it looks interesting anyways. It's like a horror game built around like Northern Irish myths. You can see that there's at least a match gameplay mechanic and characters and things you have to run away from and death scenes of some of those characters. So yeah, apparently you can die yourself. A lot of horror games you can't ever actually die. So I'm gonna definitely recommend this. And then there's another game here called Absolov, which is coming out in the gods from the same developer. So in looking at two bad games, I've got something here that looks actually rather interesting. So I'm gonna make sure this gets added to the wish list, even though I'm going backwards at this point. Instead of looking at games that start with the letter D, I mean the letter W, I'm looking at things that start with the letter U. Next game we have to consider is Wrench, which is a far jump from a horror game. This is an early access VR game where you're working on cars. There's a couple of these. This one is 82% positive of 146 reviews. I'd like to play something like this because I have no education or knowledge about how to maintain or run cars or fix cars at all. And probably something like this would be just enough to make me dangerous. I still, after playing, even if I played multiple games like this and it felt like I understood things, I still would only know probably enough to watch what a real mechanic does to make sure that they know what they're doing and they're not scamming me. And most people don't need to rebuild your engine in a car or even do too much others. You might need to change a belt at once in a while, or change the oil definitely, and change the tires, but changing brake pads and stuff like that might be something that you don't even have to do, let alone have a completely disassembled, I believe that's one of the shafts, piston shafts, that's disassembled here, and you're having to put every single piece together. This would be great for somebody who was into a automotive class and they needed to practice on some of the internal mechanics without having a garage to work on cars for real. I guess though, as long as this is still early access and a VR only game, which I think it is, although it doesn't say this. Oh no, it doesn't require VR, so I could buy it if it wasn't out of an early access. So if this wasn't in early access, I'd put it on the wish list until it comes out of early access. Though it stays here, although this also did come out December 19th 2018, so it's really going to get a whole year of being in early access. And there's a lot more reason why I could see this being in early access, but a year of early access is pushing it for, frankly, any game. So they need to wrap it up. Moving on, I need to wrap it up too. We are done with the W's, so that's hopefully going to only leave a small collection of games after W, X, Y, Z, and a few Asian characters. So next game we have here is Tag Sexual Content. I'm going to go blurry for just a second just to make sure all the screenshots are YouTube friendly. Uh, yeah, there's some cleavage, but that seems to be the only real issue. So, all right. This game, having just looked at all the screenshots, looks like it is a pretty simplistic Arkanoid game, for lack of a better term. It just looks like Arkanoid. It's 87% positive with 33 user reviews. Came out July 15th. But there's no video here. It's in early access. It really doesn't look like it's much of a game. I'm really questioning why this is even on the follow list. Yeah. I could go and look at the positive reviews, but I don't think there's a good reason to believe the positive reviews. It's English and Russian. That's another red flag. So... yeah, I don't see anything here that makes any sense as far as an actual game. This feels like a troll game or a low effort game. So this can be removed. Next game was removed completely from Steam. So I'll have to do some research to figure out what that is. But there's only a few reasons why a game is completely removed from Steam. Even if a game was taken off for sale on good terms with Valve, it would still have a Steam page. Games that get removed completely from Steam are usually doing something that really irritates Valve, so they just say, we're not doing business with you at all. And Valve is a very libertarian company for the most part, and they don't do that a lot. Or the developer just did some shady business dealings of some sort. Either they didn't have the license to music, license to art, cloned or stole code from an entire different game. Being a clone of a game, as I use the phrase clone, is not illegal, but just downright copyright infringement definitely is. So that game needs to be removed from the follow list because it's never coming back. That link will never return. And we ran into a few of those, certainly, and there was quite a few pages earlier on in previous recordings where it was an adult game and I wasn't logged in, so I didn't show them. None of those adult games I think actually made it to the wish list. They were bad, low effort adult games that probably shouldn't have even been on the follow list. Next game we have to consider here is Jing, The Land Beyond. This is 85% positive with 115 user reviews. It's $19.99. Now, does this not require VR? Because if it doesn't, I think I can put it on the wish list. Let's see. Has full support for HTC Vive and Oculus with options to use either, as well as range of control options. Let's see. I think this can be played without VR because it doesn't have the warning sign. If it can, I'd put this on the wish list. I just want to be really sure, and I'm sure that's why this is on the follow list, is that I did not have the time to investigate it. Let's see. 2012 first signs of development, 2015 pre-order place, 2017 final arrival of the Master Please You Died. The non-VR desktop version. So there is a non-VR desktop version. So it's been like 5 years in development, which is about as long as it takes to develop a game, and that's why Kickstarter kind of fails for games. Let's see. It's been a couple years after that. Let's see. 9 to 15 hours to get 100% story achievements. Seems like the issues that would be here are that the game might not be much of a game and it might just be a pretty walking simulator. Alright, here's a complaint for the VR version. The games are all tedious key and switch and key finding. I was far more often impeded by slow walking speed and useless platforming sections than I was by the platformers. You are regularly forced to walk back across sections of the game you've already completed if you want to bring a newly discovered key item to the key item receptacle it belongs to. As though I should feel clever for remembering there was a pineapple-shaped keyhole that I passed 5 minutes ago, and be rewarded with another 5 minutes of time wasting backtracking. No effort on world building. If you've already played every other puzzle adventure game of any repute, this game certainly has a bunch of puzzles waiting for you to fill up a bunch of your time if you're desperate to waste it. Otherwise, I can't recommend Jing. Very small fraction of the puzzles are interesting at all. So this feels like this is an example of someone who well, there's some extra DLC, but that might just be visual more than anything else, or this might be for a completely different game. Let's see, let's read more about Icecape free DLC. Yeah, okay, it seems just to change the graphics. So what I think the case here is somebody was trying to make a visually appealing VR game and focus so much on the visuals that they really didn't make much of an interesting game. Let's see. So they want $20 for this. I could say mob rule and ignore the negative reviews, particularly since a significant amount of the negative reviews seem to kind of focus around the VR elements. And I do like pretty things. I'm not going to lie. So either I listen to the negative reviews or I say this seems good enough. I think this seems good enough. I think this probably would be a mediocre experience. Maybe I'd be upset if I paid $20 for it, but usually when trying to buy these games I want to see it at least half off, and at $10 that wouldn't be too much of an investment. In all fairness, Abduction, which is a game made by the creators of Myst, it too is an example of a game that I played that was very pretty and yet wasn't as much of a puzzle as I would have liked it to be. And the main problem with Abduction, I think in particular, is that the variety of the puzzles were not there. It was the same gameplay mechanic over and over again. So in comparison, this is 78% positive, whereas this, by the percentages, is 85% positive. So Jing the Lands Beyond is going to the wish list. Next game we have to consider is a game called Exo Box Circle and Cross, which is, I think, a 3D... I don't need to reload it. Yeah, a 3D twist on Tic-Tac-Toe. An interesting thought with no reviews though. It's $1.99. So either I take this as it is a VR game that nobody really wanted to play and nobody bought, and thus it has no relevancy, which is exactly what it is. Or I somehow twist in my head that this is a hidden gem, and I don't think I can do that. there really is no way to look at these graphics and say this is a hidden gem game that everybody should have in VR for $1.99. Although you don't need VR, it still looks terrible, even outside of VR. So yeah, this can get removed. Next game we have on Steam is called Yeti Simulator. So there's this game that allegedly is in development, and I guess allegedly is about the best I can say. It's in development, it really is, called Yeti Simulator, but it's being created by a person that doesn't really know how to program and doesn't really know how to be a manager or creator of a project. So he's constantly feature creeping, he's constantly trying to add more things to the game. It's just never going to be finished. He can't work with people. A AAA publishing company was going to work with him and hire other programmers, and they couldn't work together. I don't know the exact details, but they definitely aren't working together now. Yeti Simulator is this game where you're playing as an anime girl who's in love with an anime character to the point of lunacy, and she's like killing any other female students that would be romantic rivals to her. Yeti Simulator seems to be a clone of that in the opposite genders, so you're playing as a guy who is killing romantic interests. And the funny thing here is, while Yeti Simulator is not on Steam, both of these games look about the same level of done, which is to say not very done. What is going to happen is, if this game Yeti Simulator ever got any coverage, it would probably get banned from Steam, because Steam does not like drama as much as anybody else does, and this is kind of a troll game more than anything else, or a joke game. I think there's actually a couple of these out there, as people have gotten tired of Yeti Simulator not coming out, because it's been in development for years, and there's really no reason for it. If Yeti Simulator had come out in a reasonable amount of time, it would have come out, it would have made some waves as the game that it is, but it's been stretched out. And if you follow the Yandere dev's web YouTube video, he puts out monthly update videos that are more stories, trying to get people to support him, I assume, on Patreon. So he's just stretching it out more and more. Though here, as far as my decision, this clone game of Yeti Simulator, there's no reason for this to stay on the wish list. There is a reason why there really hasn't been a game completely around the idea of playing as a yandere or Yonpai character in a Japanese developer doing that. It's because they really couldn't write a good, interesting story around it, and it would be tasteless, and it would be gruesome, and it would not sell that well. These games, being made by what seems like Western developers, are still tasteless and gruesome and won't sell that well, and are going to cause more controversy than what they're worth. Inherently, whether you're playing as a male character who's crazy or a female character who's crazy, you're also playing as a high school character. Maybe you could say they're in college character, but you're playing as a young in-school character in both of these games, who is killing other young in-school characters, which is a problem. This game also is pretty lazy on the 3D models, and you could asset flip anime-looking girls that looked much more consistent than what this has. Anyways, yeah, that's more of a a reason to rant than a reason to buy this game. This is leaving the follow list. Meanwhile, next game we have, I don't need to reload these, but I was hoping this one would get more reviews. A game called Yearning. 3 user reviews, came out November 9th, 2018. This looks like an RPG Maker game. No, it's not quite an RPG Maker game. What it looks like is possibly a Korean horror game, just a simplistic adventure game. I'm not expecting a lot here, and there is a kind of large number of horror adventure games where you're walking from hallway to hallway, and this is definitely dark screenshot syndrome where the vast majority of the screen is blacked out and they're using a paper lantern to light the way. Let's see, $9.99 is expensive. It's English and Japanese, so it's not a Korean game. Yeah, if you encounter a shadow, you're supposed to just run away, so there's no real game there. Let's see, 3 positive reviews, all in English. That is strange for a Japanese game. And no negative reviews. Detention is getting compared to this. Detention is more of a... That's a Korean horror game. Although, yeah, Soma, I think you can play with the enemies turned off now. But if you had the enemies turned on, that would be a 3D version of this style of game. And wandering around scary places like Amnesia in 3D. Yeah, so there is a bit of a tradition here. Question, I guess, would be, does this game have relevancy? Is this game worth $5? Let's say it goes on sale for $5. I don't think that it probably does. The other game this developer has made is called Black Mist, and it looks like a retro pixel graphics platformer. So this might just be a indie Japanese developer. And I don't know if you're really getting anything from this. From it being set in the past of the Edo period. Like, the game really isn't showing anything, is it? Maybe bits of conversation. And that's about it. So if we were to look at detention, let's see, here's detention. In comparison, this is 77% positive of 9,980 horror games. This video starts off with a Korean style animation and full intro video, and here you see she's interacting with the character. We don't have dark screenshot syndrome. Looks like the mouse works here, where Yearning was just a single player game. Looks like there's actual conversation happening, different bits of art, things to look at, things to think about. Just on the face of looking at the screenshots, it seems like there's a pretty different game here. And this feels a lot like The Cat Lady, which is a horror game I've covered, or I guess one of a horror trilogy now, with Downfall and wow, I've forgotten the third game that just came out's name. Yeah, Cat Lady, similar style of game. But the difference between Detention and The Cat Lady is those games have reviews and they have relevancy, and this kind of doesn't. And I don't think I really need to scrape the bottom of the barrel for a game like this, so I'm gonna take this off the fall list. If it was cheaper, if it was a $5 base price or a $3 base price, I would consider it then. But I think they've overpriced themselves. We could look at the Average playtime 4 hours, 4 hours, 1.7 hours. That seems unbelievable that that's how long they would have for the playtime on this. Moving on, next game we have to consider is called Yeti Orog. This is 60% positive with 23 user reviews. This is a game that claims to be full motion video, but I think it's really actually just closer to the equivalent of still images with kind of a walking simulator elements here. You're clicking on everything that you can click on. The original version of the game Myst was like this, and it worked on an Apple II computer in the early 80s, or maybe 70s, and we really haven't seen what is effectively a visual slideshow of a game kind of since that point. Yep. This is mixed in its reviews. It's free to play. I really don't have any reason to cover this game. Weird, too short, and boring is a negative review. This can get removed. Let's see. Next game we have to consider is Yonder, the Cloud Catcher Chronicles. Is it in early access? No? Okay. Came out July 18th, 2017. It is 81% positive of 1,912 user reviews. Looks like there's something here of a game. Maybe this is too much of an exploration or crafting or open world game for me, and that might be the reason why I was considering it and had it on the follow list instead of the wish list. I guess that is something to consider. So let's look at the negative reviews. $25 is quite an expense within a free accessory pack. Let's see. Build farms. I really don't want to play farming games. After I tried Stardew Valley, I really didn't like it. So yeah, and most people that did try Stardew Valley were overwhelmingly positive, so it's really just a personal thing. I tried them, I didn't like them. If I'm mostly just doing that again in this game, I'm probably not going to have a great experience. There is a game where you're collecting slimes and you're farming them, then I'm willing to try that game because I think there's more world exploration to that, but that's kind of an exception to the rule. We have, honestly, I kind of thought the game was boring. It's gorgeous and the plot's cute, but I found all the running around to be tedious and tasks repetitive. It's not a terrible game, it's just not a great game. Thought it'd be a good 3D Stardew Valley with maybe some mods down the line making the boring animal designs like Pokemon or something. Turns out it's a lot of fetch quests in big open fields with no threats, like walking in emptiness and collecting items that don't really do anything. The boring game is for you then. This boring game is for you for, well, whatever. I was hoping for an update. I regret the purchase. Yeah, I see that too. I think that this is maybe something you'd give to a really young kid, but even at that, the price is way too high for what they're offering. It really is kind of an example of a game that would have needed a ridiculous amount of support and just didn't have it. And this accessory pack seems to be just 6 visual accessory things after year 1. That's all the update it got. Otherwise, it's been abandoned. A game like this might actually run on a mobile phone these days too, and I imagine if they could run ads or in-game purchases, that there would be some better reason to continue maintaining a game like this. And in a weird way, you could probably asset flip this game pretty easily. It would take more work than you'd want to spend, but since there are a bunch of big open fields and not a lot going on, you just need an asset of a tree, an asset of an animal, an asset of a house, asset of a character. Yep, this is getting removed. Let's see. Next game we have to consider is Yorma Jack's Ring. I think this wasn't out yet, and it's still not. It still deserves another 6 months, so this should just stay on the fall list. There is a bit of a question as far as whether this is actually a good FMV game or whether this is actually a really bad FMV game, along with a point-and-click adventure. I think I saw a review from one of the other games this developer made that reviewed it kind of negatively. I don't know. Well, regardless, without trying to figure it out, there's simply there's simply not enough reviews here to play that. If I wanted to play a point-and-click adventure FMV game, Contradiction is a good choice. There's some other ones that are decent choices for FMV games that have a lot more relevancy than this does. So, yeah, I'll leave this on the fall list. Next game we have here is Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links. I'm honestly considering playing this. There's some weirdness with Duel Links and Yu-Gi-Oh! In particular, because it seems like they've changed how Yu-Gi-Oh! Plays to the point where you can only have 3 creatures on the field at a time, when it felt like you could have had 5 spell and trap cards and 5 creatures on the field. I know Yu-Gi-Oh! In many games does change how it plays. There's some online stuff. There's a lot of in-app purchases style stuff. I've played this on my cell phone for a brief time, but honestly, I started playing it because I was bored and couldn't be recording content. And as soon as like E3 stopped happening, I kind of stopped playing it because I didn't have to watch live streams at that point. So I've kind of jumped onto this and jumped off. As for my decision right now, Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links would only really be played on Steam and on PC as if I was replacing Hearthstone when I was streaming every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And I don't think there's as much of an interest or variety here. The people that are willing to play a Yu-Gi-Oh! Game or want to play a Yu-Gi-Oh! Game, 75% of them are having fun with it. But I don't think you're grabbing a new audience here. And a Yu-Gi-Oh! Game maybe is a little faster than the Hearthstone game, but it's not as visually polished. This is a cell phone game being converted to Steam instead of Hearthstone, which is a PC game that was then ported to cell phones. And you can definitely tell in the quality of the visuals the difference. And frankly, Yu-Gi-Oh! As the main character is kind of over. Yami Yugi as the main character is overemphasized in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Series at this point. And a faceless hero and just playing the card game might be more interesting. So this is like the one card game that I'll leave on the fall list, but pretty much every other one it has been removed for not being relevant or interesting. Next game we have to consider is called Zakari Pinball. It's still in early access. It came out January 16th, 2016. While this is 77% positive, I'm not willing to buy a game that is in early access. I have no clue what the early access part would be in this, but clearly it's been abandoned. And this says it's free to play, but then it's $5 for a starter pack, or you have to get the gold pack for $48 or the $92.82 platinum pack to buy different tables, which is how all of the pinball games work on Steam. That's not really the problem. The problem is, why are you saying your base game is in early access when you've been putting out 71 updates of adding tables? In comparison, let's see if Pinball FX 3 here gets recommended. Pinball FX 2. Here's Pinball FX 3. It came out September 26, 2017. I don't know if that's actually the day that Pinball FX 3 came out, or Pinball FX 1 may have come out at the time. In comparison, though, this is not labeled as early access, and they have entire seasons and volumes of tables that they're constantly putting out. So there's no reason to confuse the issue and say your base game is in early access when it probably isn't, or if the base game elements are actually in early access, then that's a problem either way. Or you have Pinball Arcade here, which has a whole collection of games and pinball tables that they sold, although Pinball Arcade lost the license to a significant amount of their tables, so in the last 30 days it's 43% positive, where over its lifetime it was 72% positive. A significant amount of real-world tables from famous actual real-world pinball table developers went from being licensed on Pinball Arcade, which I think Pinball Arcade does a better job of emulating than Pinball FX 3 does, but they went from Pinball Arcade to Pinball FX, and so in one fell swoop, Pinball Arcade went from a good game to a bad game. This is clearly just a badly advertised and published game. So yeah, I'm gonna take them at their face value and believe them when they say this game is in early access, and then look at when it was released originally and say it's never coming out of early access. And for that reason, I'm going to remove this from the follow list. And that might be a shame. There might be some 70s style tables here that they're emulating. Let's see, more than 35 different pinball tables between 74 and 87. I wouldn't have played any of these old 70s pinball tables, so I don't really have any nostalgia for them, and I couldn't speak to the accuracy of the emulation in any way. But I would have been willing to play these games and try them if they had just not labeled themselves as early access. So that's a shame. Moving on. Let's see. Next we have a game tagged sexual content and nudity, so let's go blurry for just a second. Make sure everything is YouTube friendly. If these images would like to load up. Come on, game. Well, it looks like it's good enough. So this is a visual novel that's 83% positive of 204 reviews, called Zaleria Sanctuary. Seems like there's a blonde character that's a romance interest, a big busted brunette or redhead, and then a bright red-headed cat girl character. And I don't think that there's too much else you can really take from this. It seems like it kind of is just all over the place, and it seems like this is kind of more of a joke game than an actual effort to make a visual novel. It's $9.99. It's English and Russian. That's a red flag. It's tagged 18 plus, and then it says it has beautiful half-naked girls. Let's see, you could look at the negative reviews. Insanely short for its price, prone to freezing up and just plain crashing. DLC is basically broken, must be why it's free. So yeah, I'm seeing nothing here that looks like a real effort to make a good product. I don't care personally if an adult plays a game or if they sell games to adults that have sexual content and nudity in them. More is the better. I think there should be more of those games that are good quality and are sold and supported by more people who buy video games. That being said, this isn't a good quality product from what looks of it. It looks like a low effort troll game, and so or at least a very low effort Russian game, so it's getting removed from the follow list. Moving on, next we have a game called Zombotron. It came out April 22nd, 2019. This seems like it is a shoot 'em up, not a shoot 'em up game, a shooter platformer game. Yeah, it looks good for what it is. I'm not seeing anything too concerning. There's a lot of blood on the screen that might be distracting at times. This really would be a case of just how well does it play and how irritating is it. It's $14.99. It's English and Russian, which is a bit of a red flag, but we'll see what the reviews have to say. Let's look at the negative reviews and look for trouble. Let's see, I'd like to recommend Zombotron. It's a pretty good and unique game. I probably will recommend it in the future, but for now, I'll wait for a few patches before buying. Level ambush is seriously broken. The ambush part is incredibly hard. Face-to-face combat is impossible, and trying to outsmart enemies don't work at all because the two enemies spawn game lags it terribly. This is April 27th that was reviewed. Despite I like the art and the ambulance, that's all. Man, half the time people don't even speak English when writing these these reviews. The gameplay is buggy, and we are stuck to everything every time. It's so infuriating. Can't skip cutscenes before bosses, and it's a pain in the neck. Can't recommend in the current state. Alright. Meanwhile, if I wanted to play a platforming shooter game, there probably are a few to consider, although they're recommending Half-Life instead. Valve is, Steam is. So $15 for a game people are not super happy about. When we look at what Armor Games as the publisher has published otherwise, we have a game called Don't Escape 4 Days to Survive. We have Love is Dead, a game I chose not to cover. Looking for anything here. Soda Dungeon, which is kind of a troll game that got a lot of reviews somehow. There definitely was a point when troll games would get reviewed well, and people finally decided to get stop doing that and get more serious about the review systems on Steam, instead of just saying, oh well, this is a funny game. Wouldn't it be funny if we reviewed it and gave it great scores that it didn't deserve? So I'm at the point, looking at the negative reviews, they're saying the controls are buggy, and it came out April 22nd, and the reviews are before just slightly after that. Yeah, and they're saying it's buggy. So maybe there was a patch on May 1st, and yeah. It's 90% positive. I think Mob Rule wins here. I think Mob Rule wins, and so this will go to the wish list. And I was hoping we would have finished a little bit faster than this, but I guess I got into too many rants. Let's move on to the next game to consider. Next game we have is Zone of Enders, the second runner, MARS or MVRS. In the last 30 days, it's 30% positive. In its lifetime, it's 67% positive. This is a Konami game. Konami games suck because Konami doesn't care about making video games anymore. I wouldn't be surprised if this is a game that they made for an arcade and then they ported it to VR. That might be part of the problem. Now, Cygames, as a developer, what else did they make? Shadowverse, and that's it. I recognize the name, didn't recognize what game it was with. Zone of Enders was an anime, maybe a manga too, so there's some relevancy there, and that probably explains why it has 231 user reviews. But I don't think it was an anime in this decade, and this is kind of a mecha, like robot fighting game in VR, or at least it can be played in VR. But the mob clearly does not enjoy it. It does not play well, and I don't think it's much of a game. Whereas I'm not sure what other games you'd want to play. Maybe Astro Breed Definitive Edition? Let's see. We could look at that, or Strike Suit Zero. Frankly, I really would just want to play a Gundam Wing game. And that would be it, or a Gundam game of some sort. It doesn't have to be Gundam Wing. It's a story arc. As a game where you control a robot and fight with those robots, and it's pretty and cool and fast moving. This clearly is not the game for me, so it's going to get removed. Whereas if Astro Breed is tagged as a shoot 'em up bullet hell game, so let's see if we can see actual gameplay. Yeah, this is a bullet hell shooter game, which most bullet hell shooter games are so busy and have so much on the screen, it's not something I could ever play. But you know what? I think I would try this. This might be at 89% positive. This might be the kind of game, like I said earlier, where I should just step out of my comfort zone and give them a chance. So yeah, if somebody was to gift me this game when it was on sale, hopefully, yeah, I'd be willing to give it 30 minutes and see if I could maybe get good at something like this, as far as a mech game and a bullet hell shooter game. Or the other game that Steam recommended was Strike Suit Zero, which is 80% positive of 1,130 reviews. And it seems like it's kind of the same general concept, except for this one's more in space. So yeah, I'll put this on the wish list too. Clearly I'm emotionally drained and not willing to, and as such I'm being really generous to have 2 mech games going to the wish list when frankly not many of them should go. Next game is tagged sexual content and nudity, so let me just make sure I can show the contents. This one's a little iffy, but I think we're still family friendly on YouTube. So next game we have is Asterix Necromancy Emily's Escape. I feel like there's probably another game called Emily's Escape. This is an example of a bad platformer that was half done and then they just threw in some anime characters in skimpy clothing to try and sell it better. Let's see. Is there anything else to even really say here? Like there are better games like Akiba's Trip Undead and Undressed, for instance, is a much better lewd game if you want to play something like that, where you actually have good gameplay, or at least a chance of gameplay. There's a patch here in the first recommendation review to uncensor it. The game experience is very poor. Is pretty much all you need to hear for this. Like, yeah, there's just no game here. It's just totally not a game. It's just trying to sell on sex. And heck, if you want to see nudity and stuff, Pornhub exists. You don't need to spend $14.99 on a garbage game to see anime girls in skimpy clothing. You can get that for free, and Steam doesn't need to be full of garbage games like this. Next game I would have considered, it has again been removed from Valve and Steam completely. And yes, we are doing the spring cleaning event, but like, I started on May 28th and it's taken me to June 16th is today to finish. So this has long since happened, but this page hasn't reloaded, so the event banner is still there. Again, I'll have to do some research and figure out what game we didn't look at. Let's see, next game to consider, we have one that's a bunch of Asian characters and it's called Strayer. This is 60% positive of 66 reviews, came out March 12th, 2019. It's probably a Chinese game that looked slightly interesting, but now it really has only been maybe a year since I've had to really deal with Chinese games coming to Steam, because around January 1st was about the time that they started putting games on Steam in large amounts, and that was definitely caused because China stopped approving games for being on sale in China for I think 6 months before the first, and then several months after the first, and then they technically now approve games, but they change the rules and reject things quite heavily. And so a significant amount of people who in a year previous had just been able to make a game and put it anywhere on the Wemo website that's owned by Tencent, which is the equivalent of Steam on in China, can no longer do that, and they've got these games they designed, or they're trying to make money to keep people employed, and they're getting desperate. Yeah, so this is an English Chinese game. With my higher standards, I can definitely look at this and see there's nothing here. This is really just asset flips or assets just being placed around. There's really no depiction of what the gameplay actually is at all. So, moving on. Let's see. Next game we have to consider is a bunch of Asian characters, and then the disappearing of Gensokyo, which looks like it is a top-down action hack and slash, but it's tagged as a bullet hell game. So, I don't know. 87% positive, so people seem to like it. 2001 user reviews. Yeah, it does kind of look like a dungeon crawler with bullet hell, top-down twin stick movements. That might be an interesting combination of gameplay. To buy this whole game would be $14.14 with all the extra characters. Maybe this is a Korean game, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's a Chinese game or a Japanese game also. Sometimes it gets confused as far as what is what. This looks like this might be a Toho game. Fight against famous Toho characters, find their weakness, and save Gensokyo. So yeah, this is part of some kind of series of Toho that I'm still not really have my mind around. That being said, there's kind of nothing here, and there's no reason why this wouldn't be on the wish list. Like, maybe when I have to put my money where my mouth is, I wouldn't actually buy this game because I don't fully understand it. but right now it looks fine. Looks like a fine bullet hell anime game dungeon crawler. Moving on, we are done. So I just wanted to point out, this is my follow list as it was, and I ran out of RAM, so the background was not loaded. So imagine if this was blue. Sorry for the brightness. This is the entirety of what the follow list was before we did the follow list cleanup. And it has been an incredibly long journey, but an incredibly profitable experience too, because a significant amount of these games are now in no way under consideration, and a good handful of these games are actually on the wish list. So we found the good, we separated the wheat from the chaff, and now in 6 months to a year's time, as I'm adding more games to this list every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, it will be a much shorter experience. There will be a lot less bad games to consider. When making videos like this, if it's just good games, we can talk about the good games a lot more, and we can get rid of the bad games a lot quicker. And a follow list cleanup 6 months to a year now might be only like 5 hours instead of being what almost certainly was 24 plus hours of content. We squeezed the last 2 episodes together in a bit, so instead of having to cover an hour worth of games just for games starting with X, or an hour worth of games just starting with the letter Z, we got everything between between W to any character after Z, any Asian characters or non-English characters, which is great profit. Very, very helpful. The reason, just to say it again, that I wanted to cover all these games on recordings is because, frankly, I could have spent this 24 hours in silence doing the same work, but I feel that it helps me create some content and have something to show. It gives people something to watch if they want some backlog YouTube footage, if they're bored, and it explains the thought process and where my head is at. And certainly with some of these games, my head is at in a lewd or perverted perspective. There are definitely some adult games and visual novels that were on the follow list that made it to the wish list. Who's to say how many of those actually would ever get bought or covered? And if I do cover them, I don't know how I do that on YouTube, but I still would want to support the industry for people making good adult games, at the very least, so I don't have to look at so many bad ones that are released. So now is the point to reload this page, and now that I have all my RAM recovered, we can show where we are at this point. And if something's on the wish list, then it shouldn't be on the follow list, so I'll open that one and see what the deal with that is. A much shorter list, we will see. Why is that on the wish list? I don't know. Nothing should be on the follow list and the wish list unless I already own it. There definitely were some games like Control that are on the wish list that don't have release dates, so that should also be a consideration. And there are definitely games like this Contra Anniversary Collection that got added to the follow list after I started doing the cleanup, so they haven't been given the full 6 months. But for the most part, all we see now are games that are either VR games that were good enough to be purchased if I ever do buy VR games, or games that have been out less than 6 months and have less than 20 verified purchase reviews, and I'm still considering them. Everything before January 1st has, for the most part, maybe one game before January 1st. It has been removed one way or the other. And yes, this is a much, much shorter list. I'm not sure I could go through all of these unless I moved very fast, and I don't think I could do this in less than 5 hours, but I think I could do it in less than 10. So, and this was really the cleanup that needed to happen, because I had already last year for December 2018 done cleanup on the wish list. So we have a very, very curated wish list now, and it's not particularly worth it at this point to point out what the wish list is. You can just click on the link down below to see my wish list in its current state. So yeah, we're done, and it was definitely helpful to me. Maybe not so helpful to people who didn't want to watch this footage, but yeah, I'm very satisfied. So, as always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos, because that helps me with YouTube and tells them that my videos are worth watching. When you subscribe, you have to click the notification bell, and then you have to put the pull down if you want to get all notifications. If you see a holo bell, then you're getting personalized notifications, which means no guarantee you'll get any notifications at all from that channel. If you want to get some backup notifications, there's a bunch of social media sites listed down below that you could also follow me on. And if you would be so kind, it would be very much appreciated that you could support this channel either by friending me on Patreon, well, supporting me on Patreon, or by friending me on Steam and gifting me a game either off my wish list or just a game you'd like me to see, or you could gift cards if you don't want to make a decision. Thank you for watching this series. I hope you found it at least a bit informative. Have a good evening. Thank you.